I think it would be better if you stayed in the kitchen, my daughter-in-law whispered with a practiced smile. The parents and special guests are sitting in the auditorium. I quietly picked up the tray of cookies and walked away before anyone could see the tears filling my eyes. I thought the most painful part of that afternoon was being treated like I didn't belong. I was wrong. Less than 5 minutes later, the school principal walked into the kitchen, stared at me in complete disbelief, and said loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "Mrs. James Holloway, my God, we've been looking for you for years." If you've ever felt invisible because of your age, I'd love to hear your story. Please like this video if stories about family dignity and second chances speak to your heart. Subscribe if you'd like to join me for more heartfelt journeys like this one. And before we begin, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. I'd truly love to read every comment. My name is James Holloway, and I was 69 years old the afternoon my daughter-in-law told me to sit in the kitchen. I know my name surprises people sometimes. All my life, whenever I introduced myself, someone would raise an eyebrow and say, "James, as in James," and I would smile the way my mother taught me to smile and say, "Yes, ma'am, James." My father wanted a son, but when I arrived instead, he decided the name still belonged to me. By the time I was old enough to understand the weight of a name, I had already learned how to carry heavier things. I was born in a small house on the east side of Columbus, Ohio. Back when neighbors still sat on porches and children played until streetlights came on. My mother cleaned offices at night. My father drove a city bus for 31 years. Neither of them had much money, but they gave me something better. They gave me manners, backbone, and the kind of faith that does not shout, but stands still when storms come. I became a teacher because of my second-grade teacher, Mrs. Eloise Brown. She was the first adult outside my home who ever looked at me as if I had something important inside me. She used to tap my composition notebook and say, "James, your words know where they're going before you do." I never forgot that. For 38 years, I taught first grade at Lincoln Elementary School. Room 104. Same corner windows, same squeaky radiator. Same smell of crayons, chalk dust, pencil shavings, and cafeteria rolls drifting down the hallway just before lunch. I taught children how to read their first sentences. I tied shoelaces. I wiped noses. I dried tears. I kept extra mittens in my bottom drawer because Ohio winters had no mercy on little hands. I bought peanut butter crackers with my own money for children who came to school hungry and pretended they had already eaten. Some people think teaching small children is gentle work. It is not. It is holy work, and holy work will empty you if you let it. Every child walks into a classroom carrying a story they do not yet know how to tell. Some carry joy. Some carry fear. Some carry hunger. Some carry anger they learned from adults who should have loved them better. My job was not only to teach them letters, it was to teach them that they were safe enough to try. I loved that work with my whole heart. My husband Richard used to say I came home with half the classroom still attached to me. Glitter on my sleeves, marker on my fingers, little notes stuffed in my purse. He would laugh when I sat at the kitchen table grading papers after dinner and say, "James, those babies have gone home. You can rest now." But I never really could. There was always one more child to worry about, one more parent to call, one more winter coat to find, one more library book to replace because somebody's little brother spilled orange juice on it. Richard understood. He was a quiet man, kind in ways that did not need an audience. He worked as a mechanic at a Ford dealership and could fix almost anything with patience and the right wrench. When our son Michael was born, Richard held him like he was holding the sunrise. Michael was our only child. I loved that boy so deeply, I sometimes think I forgot to teach him how much a mother's love costs. When Richard died of a heart attack nearly 15 years ago, Michael was already grown working as a construction engineer and trying to make his own way. Still, losing Richard left a silence in my house that no radio, no television, No Sunday church choir could fill. I retired 3 years after Richard passed. People told me I deserved rest. They said I had given enough. But the first morning I woke up with nowhere to go, I sat on the edge of my bed and cried into my hands. For almost 4 decades, my life had been measured in school bells, morning announcements, reading circles, fire drills, parent-teacher conferences, Christmas programs, end-of-year hugs from children missing their front teeth. Then suddenly, there was only the ticking clock in my kitchen. So I learned to live smaller. I planted tomatoes behind my house. I baked lemon cookies for church fundraisers. I joined a library book club where 3 women argued every Thursday about whether a novel had a satisfying ending. I drove my old blue Buick to the grocery store, clipped coupons, and waved at neighbors who still remembered Richard. I was not rich. I was not glamorous. I did not wear designer clothes or speak loudly about my accomplishments. My pension paid the bills. My house was modest but clean. My dresses were old but pressed. My shoes were comfortable. My hands were wrinkled, but they had held hundreds of children through their first fears. That should have been enough. Then Michael married Lauren. I still remember the first time he brought her to Sunday dinner. She was beautiful in the polished way some people are beautiful, every detail arranged before she stepped into a room. Smooth blonde hair, pearl earrings, a cream-colored coat that looked too expensive to hang on my old wooden rack by the door. She worked in marketing for a healthcare company downtown and spoke in confident sentences as if every word had been approved by a committee before leaving her mouth. At first, I tried to like her. I made pot roast because Michael said she preferred traditional family meals. I baked apple pie from scratch. I put fresh flowers on the table even though January flowers cost too much at the grocery store. Lauren looked around my dining room and smiled politely. "This is charming," she said. "Not warm, not lovely, charming." I had lived long enough to know when a compliment was wearing gloves. During dinner, she asked where I liked to travel. I told her I had never been much farther than Tennessee, except for one teachers' conference in Chicago years ago. She blinked, as if I had confessed to never learning how to read. "Oh," she said. "Well, some people are just homebodies, I guess." Michael laughed too quickly. "Mom likes her routines." I smiled and passed the potatoes. That was the first time I felt it, that tiny pinch behind the ribs, when someone places you in a small box and closes the lid gently so no one notices. After they married, Lauren's politeness became sharper. She never insulted me directly at first. She was too skilled for that. She corrected me gently in front of others. Actually, James, people don't really say it that way anymore. Maybe don't mention that old school story tonight. It goes on a little long. You don't have to bring food every time. Store-bought is fine now. When I wore my Navy church dress to Emily's baptism, Lauren said, "Oh, you wore that. How sentimental." When I arrived at their house with a casserole after Lauren had the flu, she opened the door and said, "You really didn't have to go through all that trouble. We usually order from places with cleaner ingredients." Cleaner ingredients, as if love baked at 350 degrees in my kitchen was somehow dirty. Michael heard these things. I know he did. His eyes would flicker toward me, then away. Later, he would call and say, "Mom, you know how Lauren is. She doesn't mean anything by it, but people often mean exactly what they repeat." The only person in that house who still saw me clearly was Emily, my sweet Emily. She had Michael's brown eyes and Richard's crooked smile. From the time she could walk, she would run to me with her arms open, shouting, "Grandma James," as if my name were a song. Lauren hated that. "She should call you Grandma Holloway," Lauren said once. "It sounds more proper." But Emily refused. "Grandma James is my grandma." So, Grandma James, I remained. I taught Emily how to make biscuits without measuring how to fold paper cranes. how to sound out difficult words by breaking them into pieces. When she struggled with reading in kindergarten, Lauren wanted to hire a specialist immediately. I asked if I could sit with her twice a week. Within 3 months, Emily was reading chapter books under her blanket with a flashlight. Lauren thanked the school. Not me. I told myself it did not matter. Grandmothers are not supposed to keep score. But sometimes, late at night, I would sit at my kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold and wonder when I had become an embarrassment to the very family I had built my life around. The worst part was not Lauren's judgment. It was Michael's silence. My son, the boy whose fevers I had cooled with wet cloths. The boy whose college applications I had mailed with prayers tucked between the pages. The boy I had raised after his father's long shifts and later after his father's death. He had grown into a good man in many ways. Responsible, hardworking, gentle with Emily. But around Lauren, he became smaller, careful, afraid of disturbing the smooth surface of their perfect life. Whenever Lauren corrected me, Michael studied his plate. Whenever she dismissed me, he changed the subject. Whenever I drove home with tears blurring the traffic lights, he sent a text later. Thanks for coming, Mom. As if showing up were all I had done. By the spring of Emily's 5th grade year, I had learned the rules. Do not wear anything too old. Do not talk too much. Do not mention teaching unless asked. Do not bring homemade food unless Lauren approved. Do not correct Emily in front of Lauren, even lovingly. Do not remind anyone that before Lauren became Mrs. Holloway, I had been the woman who carried that family name through grief, debt, sacrifice, and every lonely winter that followed Richard's death. I followed those rules because I loved my son. But love can become a quiet room where people leave you sitting alone. And I suppose that is why when Emily called me one Tuesday evening, breathless with excitement, I should have felt only joy. Grandma James, she shouted into the phone. I got picked for the Lincoln Legacy Award. I sat up straighter in my chair. Baby, that's wonderful. It's at school next Friday. There's a ceremony and everything. I get to give a speech. You have to come. Okay. You have to. Lincoln Elementary. For a moment, I could not speak. I had not stepped inside that building since my retirement reception. I could still picture the hallway outside room 104. The bulletin boards, the little library corner, the playground where generations of children had lined up after recess with muddy shoes and red cheeks. I wouldn't miss it for the world, I whispered. Emily lowered her voice. Promise. I promise. That night, after we hung up, I went to my closet and took out my lavender dress. It was old, yes, but beautiful in its own soft way. Richard had bought it for me on our 30th wedding anniversary. I pressed it carefully, running the iron over each wrinkle as if smoothing a memory. I did not know then that Lauren would look at that dress and see shame. I did not know that Michael would once again choose silence. And I certainly did not know that the very school where I had given 38 years of my life was about to remember me in front of everyone who had been taught to overlook me. The week before Emily's ceremony, I found myself acting like a young mother again. I washed my lavender dress twice, even though it was already clean. I hung it on the closet door where the morning light could touch it. I polished my black shoes until I could almost see the outline of my face in them. I even opened the little cedar box on my dresser where I kept Richard's old tie clips, my mother's handkerchiefs, and the pearl earrings he had given me on our 25th anniversary. I held those earrings in my palm for a long time. Well, Richard, I whispered to the quiet room, our granddaughter is getting honored at Lincoln. Saying the school's name out loud made something ache inside me. Lincoln Elementary was not just a building to me. It was where I had spent the strongest years of my life. I had walked through those front doors as a young teacher with nervous hands and too many lesson plans. I had left as an old woman with a retirement cake, a cardboard box full of handmade cards, and a heart that did not know what to do with goodbye. I wondered if room 104 still had the same windows. I wondered if the oak tree by the playground was still there. I wondered if anyone would remember me. Then I laughed softly at myself. Of course they would not. Schools move on. Children grow up. Teachers retire. New names replace old ones on classroom doors. That was the natural way of things. Still, I wanted to look nice. Not fancy. Just nice enough that Emily would be proud when she saw me sitting in the audience. So, on Wednesday afternoon, I baked her favorite oatmeal raisin cookies. Not the dry kind from grocery store containers, but the soft kind with cinnamon brown sugar and raisins soaked in warm water first so they would not turn hard in the oven. Emily always said they tasted like hugs. I packed them carefully in a white tin with blue flowers painted on the lid. That tin had once belonged to my mother. Every Christmas, she filled it with sugar cookies and told me, "Food remembers love better than people do." By Friday morning, I woke before my alarm. The ceremony was not until afternoon, but I had already slept badly. I kept thinking of Emily standing on a stage, holding her paper with both hands, speaking in that brave little voice of hers. She had worked so hard. She deserved to feel surrounded by love. I made coffee buttered toast I barely ate and sat at my kitchen table looking at the lavender dress hanging beside the window. For a moment, I let myself feel happy. Then, my phone buzzed. It was Lauren. "Good morning, James," she said, her voice bright in the way it became when she was already annoyed. "Just checking that you're still coming today." "I am," I said. "You'll be ready by 1. There was a pause. "What are you wearing?" I looked at the dress. "My lavender dress." Another pause. Longer this time. The one from Emily's baptism. "Yes," I said carefully. "It's still in good condition." "Oh." One small word, but it landed like a stone. I touched the edge of the table. "Is there a problem?" No, she said quickly. "It's just that this event is a little more formal than I expected. There will be district people there, board members, some donors. Michael's firm may have a few connections attending too." "I understand. I just want everyone to feel comfortable." There it was, the kind of sentence that meant the opposite of what it said. "I'll be comfortable," I replied. Lauren gave a small laugh. "That's not exactly what I meant." I closed my eyes. She continued, "Maybe something darker would be better. Navy maybe, or black. Something less noticeable." "My lavender dress is quite modest, Lauren. I know. It's just a little dated." Dated. I looked down at my hands. They were wrinkled, yes. Spotted. Older than they used to be. They were dated too, I supposed. But they had cooked meals, graded papers, held sick babies, planted flowers, and folded American flags at veterans' assemblies. They had earned every line. "I don't have anything new," I said. "Well, that's fine. We can work with it." She breathed out as if managing me required patience. "Just maybe keep things simple today. Let Emily have the spotlight." "That's exactly why I'm coming." "And James?" "Yes. Please don't bring up your teaching years too much. You know how you can get emotional." My throat tightened. "I taught at Lincoln for 38 years. I know, and that's wonderful. But today is about Emily." "Not the past. Not the past." I wanted to say that children are built from the past. Families are built from the past. Every sacrifice, every bedtime story, every dollar saved, every prayer whispered over a sleeping child becomes part of what they stand on. But I only said, "I understand." When the call ended, the kitchen felt colder. For a few minutes, I sat still listening to the refrigerator hum and the wall clock tick. Then I stood, took the pearl earrings from the cedar box, and put them on anyway. If Lauren wanted me smaller, she would be disappointed. Not because I planned to embarrass her, not because I wanted attention, but because I had spent too many years shrinking myself into corners just to keep peace in rooms where no one worried about keeping peace for me. At 12:30, Michael pulled into my driveway. I saw him through the lace curtain before he came to the door. He was still handsome in the way sons remain handsome to their mothers, no matter how gray appears at their temples. He wore a navy suit, his tie slightly crooked. Richard would have fixed it before Michael even noticed. When I opened the door, Michael smiled. "Hey, Mom." "Hi, baby." He kissed my cheek and stepped inside. His eyes moved to the cookie tin on the counter, then to my dress. "You look nice," he said. I searched his face, wondering if Lauren had sent him in with instructions. "Thank you." He picked up the tin. "Cookies for Emily." His smile softened. "She'll love that." For one quiet second, he looked like my Michael again. The boy who used to run into my classroom after school and spin in my desk chair. The teenager who ate half a pan of cornbread while pretending he was not hungry. The young man who cried into my shoulder the night Richard died. Then his phone buzzed. He looked down and the softness disappeared. "Lauren says we need to head over. She's already at the school helping with setup." Of course. On the drive, Michael talked about work. A bridge inspection. A contractor who missed a deadline. Rising costs. Safe subjects. Easy subjects. I watched Columbus pass outside the window, tidy lawns, brick churches, fast food signs, school buses turning down neighborhood streets. The closer we came to Lincoln Elementary, the quieter I became. When the school appeared, my heart lifted and broke at the same time. The building had changed. The old brick front had been cleaned and expanded. There was a new glass entrance with silver letters above it, Lincoln Elementary School. The flagpole still stood near the sidewalk. The playground had newer equipment, now bright and plastic, instead of the old metal bars that burned children's palms in August. But the oak tree was still there, older, wider, its branches reaching over the grass like arms. I nearly whispered, "Hello, old friend." Michael parked near the side entrance. Before we got out, he turned to me. "Mom, Lauren's a little stressed today." I looked at him. "She just wants everything to go smoothly," he added. I held the cookie tin in my lap. "Do you think I would make things difficult?" "No." "Of course not." "Then why are you warning me?" His mouth opened, then closed. He looked toward the building instead of at me. "I'm not warning you. I just don't want any tension." I nodded slowly. "I see." But what I saw was not new. Tension in Michael's mind was never what Lauren said. It was how I felt afterward. Tension was not disrespect. It was my response to being disrespected. If I swallowed the hurt, there was peace. If I named it, there was a problem. We walked into the school together. The smell hit me first. Floor wax, paper, cafeteria food, children's soap. That strange, unforgettable scent every elementary school has, no matter how many years pass. My eyes burned. Inside the lobby, colorful student artwork covered the walls. Construction paper suns, handprint trees, essays written in large, uneven letters. A banner hung above the main hallway, Lincoln Legacy Celebration. Legacy. I stood beneath that word with my cookie tin pressed to my chest. For a moment, I imagined young James Holloway walking beside me. 30 years old, strong legs, chalk dust on her skirt, a stack of readers under one arm. She would not have believed that one day she would return here feeling like a guest who needed permission to exist. Then Emily saw me. "Grandma James." She came running down the hallway in a blue dress. Her hair curled, her face glowing with excitement. She threw her arms around my waist so hard I almost dropped the cookies. "Oh, look at you," I said, laughing through the lump in my throat. "You look beautiful." "I'm so nervous," she whispered. "That means you care." She pulled back and looked at the tin. "Are those my cookies? They might be." Her eyes lit up. "Mom said there'd be catered desserts, but yours are better." Before I could answer, Lauren appeared. She moved quickly, heels clicking against the polished floor, a clipboard in one hand, and a smile fixed on her face. "Emily, sweetheart, you need to be backstage with the student speakers." Emily held onto my hand. "Can Grandma sit with us?" Lauren's smile tightened. "Well, figure that out." "Emily, sweetheart, you need to be backstage with the student speakers." Emily held onto my hand. "Can Grandma sit with us?" Lauren's smile tightened. "Well, figure that out." I knew that tone. Emily did too. Her fingers squeezed mine. Lauren turned to me. "James, you made it." "Yes." Her eyes traveled over my dress, my earrings, my shoes, then the cookie tin. "You brought food." "For Emily." "That's sweet," she said in a voice that made sweet sound inconvenient. "But they already have refreshments in the reception area. These are just for her." "Of course." Lauren glanced around, then lowered her voice. "Just keep the tin closed for now. Okay? We don't want crumbs everywhere before the guests arrive." Emily frowned. "Mom, Emily backstage. Now." The child looked at me with apology in her eyes. I bent and kissed her cheek. "Go on, baby. It'll be right here. Promise." "I promise." She ran off, turning once to wave. I waved back. Lauren watched until Emily disappeared around the corner. Then she faced me fully. "James, today is very important. Emily worked hard, and there are a lot of influential people here." "I know. I need you to understand that this isn't like a church potluck or a family birthday." The words were soft. The insult was not. I held the tin tighter. "I know how school ceremonies work, Lauren." Her eyebrows lifted. "Yes, well, things have changed since you taught." I looked past her down the hallway where children's laughter echoed against the walls. Had things changed? Yes. The entrance was new. The boards were digital. The security desk had a computer instead of a sign-in sheet. But children were still children. Nervous before speeches. Proud of construction paper awards. Looking for familiar faces in big rooms. And older women were still expected to disappear politely when someone younger decided they no longer matched the picture. Lauren touched my elbow, lightly guiding rather than asking. "Come with me. It'll show you where you can wait until we sort out seating." Something in my stomach tightened. "Is there not a seat with the family?" She smiled without warmth. "Well, see." That was when I first felt the shadow of what was coming. Not the full humiliation yet. Not the kitchen. Not the principal's stunned face. Not the name I had not heard spoken with honor in years. Just a shadow. But sometimes, before a storm breaks, the air changes first. And standing in that hallway with my granddaughter's cookies in my hands and my daughter-in-law's fingers pressing lightly against my arm, I felt the air change. Lauren did not lead me toward the auditorium. That was the first thing I noticed. Instead of turning left, where the double doors stood open, where I could already hear the hum of conversation, the shuffle of programs, the soft echo of microphones being tested. She guided me to the right, down a narrower hallway that smelled faintly of bleach and warm bread. "The reception volunteers are this way," she said lightly, as if we had already agreed on this plan. I slowed my steps. "I thought the ceremony was in the auditorium." "It is," she said quickly, not looking at me. "But we're still organizing seating, Some of the front rows are reserved, and we don't want confusion when people arrive. Her hand remained gently on my elbow, steering me forward. I could have stopped. I could have said, "I'll wait in the lobby." I could have walked toward the sound of voices and taken a seat like any other grandmother in the building. But years of being careful had trained me well. So I followed. We passed a row of classrooms, their doors slightly open. Inside one, I caught a glimpse of a reading corner. Small chairs, bright rugs, a shelf of picture books. My heart tightened. That used to be my world. Children learning the difference between B and D. Whispering words under their breath as they traced lines with small fingers. Looking up at me with that hopeful expression that said, "Am I doing it right?" I almost stopped there, almost stepped inside and breathed in the memory. But Lauren kept walking. At the end of the hallway, she pushed open a swinging door and the sounds of the school shifted. The voices became louder, less formal. The clatter of trays replaced the soft murmur of guests. The smell of food grew stronger. The kitchen, large stainless steel counters, industrial ovens humming softly. A group of volunteers in aprons arranging desserts on trays. A stack of paper plates, plastic cups, coffee urns. Lauren released my arm. "There we go," she said, her tone bright again. "This will be perfect for now." I stood still, the cookie tin pressed against my chest. "For now?" I asked. She nodded, already scanning the room. "Yes, just until everything settles out front." One of the volunteers, a woman with short gray hair and kind eyes, looked up from arranging brownies. "Oh, hello," she said warmly. "Are you here to help?" Before I could answer, Lauren spoke. "Yes, she is." I turned my head slowly. Lauren met my eyes, still smiling. "James is great in the kitchen," she added. "She used to, well, she enjoys cooking." Enjoys cooking? As if that were the most important thing about me. The volunteer smiled. "Well, we can always use an extra pair of hands." I opened my mouth, then closed it again. Something inside me had gone very quiet. Lauren stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Just stay here for a bit, okay? I'll come get you when it's time." When it's time for what I asked. She hesitated, just long enough for the truth to show. "To find you a seat. Find me a seat." I looked down at the floor tiles, white squares with thin gray lines between them. I had walked floors like this for decades, guiding children in lines, reminding them to keep their hands to themselves, telling them not to run. Now I was the one being directed. "Lauren," I said carefully, "I came to sit with my granddaughter." "And you will," she replied quickly. "We just need to manage the room first. There are a lot of people and some seats are assigned." "I don't need a special seat." "I know," she said, her voice tightening slightly. "But appearances matter today." There it was again. Appearances. I lifted my eyes to hers. "Do I make the wrong appearance?" She exhaled, as if I were making things difficult. "That's not what I'm saying." "What are you saying?" For a moment, her smile slipped. "I'm saying," she said quietly, "that this is not the right setting for distractions." The word landed between us like something fragile and sharp at the same time. Distractions. I had spent 38 years keeping classrooms focused, redirecting attention, helping children concentrate. I had learned how to quiet chaos with a gentle voice and a steady presence. And now I was being labeled as something that would pull attention away from my own granddaughter. I felt my throat tighten, but I did not let my voice shake. "I understand." Lauren seemed relieved. "Good," she said. "I knew you would." She turned toward the door. "They'll come back for you soon." And then she was gone. The swinging door closed behind her with a soft thud. For a few seconds, I simply stood there. The kitchen noise continued around me, trays, sliding utensils, clinking voices, calling out instructions. But it all sounded distant, as if I were hearing it through water. "Ma'am," the gray-haired volunteer said gently. "Would you like to set those cookies over here?" I blinked. "Yes," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I walked to the counter and placed the tin down carefully, as if it might break. "They smell wonderful," she added, lifting the lid slightly. "Oatmeal raisin," I said. "My favorite." I smiled faintly. "Mine too." She studied my face for a moment. "You here for the ceremony?" "My granddaughter," I replied. "That's lovely." She nodded toward the hallway. "Big day out there." "Yes." She hesitated. "Do you want to be in here?" The question was simple, but it felt like someone had opened a door inside me that I had been holding closed for a long time. Did I want to be here? No. I wanted to be in the auditorium sitting beside my son, watching my granddaughter step onto a stage with her head held high. I wanted to clap when her name was called. I wanted to be part of the moment, not hidden from it. But want had very little to do with where I stood. "I'm just helping for a bit," I said. She did not look convinced, but she nodded anyway. "Well, we're glad to have you." I picked up a stack of napkins and began folding them one after another, my hands moving automatically. It was something I had done countless times: church events, school functions, family dinners. Keep busy, stay useful, do not make trouble. A group of younger volunteers entered the kitchen laughing about something one of the speakers had said during rehearsal. I heard the principal added something new to the program, one of them said. "Really?" "Yeah, some kind of special recognition. He wouldn't tell us what. Probably a donor," another guessed. "They always sneak those in." I kept folding napkins. Special recognition. Something new. The words floated past me without landing. Across the room, a small window looked out toward the back of the auditorium. Through it, I could see a slice of the stage blue curtains, a podium, rows of chairs being arranged. I moved closer almost without thinking. From that angle, I could see people taking their seats. Parents dressed in their best clothes. Teachers greeting families. Children peeking out from behind the curtain, adjusting their outfits. I searched the crowd. It took me a moment, but then I saw them. Michael sat near the front, his posture straight, his suit neat. Lauren was beside him, her back perfectly aligned, her smile ready for anyone who might look her way. There was an empty seat next to them. I stared at it. Empty. Waiting. But not for me. A pressure built behind my eyes. I turned away from the window before the tears could fall. "Everything okay?" the volunteer asked softly. I nodded. "Yes." But my voice felt far away, even to me. I returned to the counter and continued folding napkins, each crease sharp and precise. It gave my hands something to do while my heart tried to understand what had just happened. I had not been asked. I had not been offered a choice. I had been placed in the kitchen, away from the audience, away from my family, away from the moment I had been promised. And the worst part was not the room. It was the realization that no one had stopped it. Not Lauren, who had arranged it. Not Michael, who had said nothing. Not even me. For 38 years, I had taught children to raise their hands, to speak clearly, to stand up when something was wrong. And yet, in that moment, I stood in a kitchen, folding napkins, pretending I belonged there. The noise in the hallway grew louder. The ceremony was about to begin. I smoothed the last napkin and placed it neatly on the stack. Then I looked once more toward the small window where the stage waited just out of reach. And for the first time that day, something inside me began to shift. Not anger, not yet. Something quieter, something stronger. The kind of feeling that comes when a person has been pushed just far enough to realize they are standing at the edge of something that will not stay the same. I did not know what was about to happen next, but I knew this much. I was not meant to stay invisible. Not here. Not anymore. I had just finished stacking the last row of napkins when the kitchen door swung open again. This time, it was not Lauren. A man stepped in, tall, neatly dressed, in a dark suit, his tie perfectly aligned, his posture, the kind that comes from years of standing in front of people who expect answers. He carried a clipboard in one hand, but he wasn't looking at it. His eyes moved quickly around the room, scanning, assessing, as if searching for something specific, or someone. "Excuse me," he said to the volunteers, his voice calm but purposeful. "Has anyone seen?" He stopped mid-sentence. I felt it before I fully understood it. That moment when someone's attention lands on you and does not move. I looked up. Our eyes met. At first, I thought he might simply be confused. Maybe I reminded him of someone. Maybe he was trying to place a face from a long time ago. But then, his expression changed. Not confusion, recognition. Deep, sudden, unmistakable. He took a step closer. "Ma'am," he said slowly, as if choosing each word with care. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but could you tell me your name?" Something about the way he asked respectful, almost careful, made me straighten slightly. "James Holloway," I replied. For a second, he didn't breathe. Then he let out a quiet, almost disbelieving laugh under his breath. My God. The room seemed to shift. He took another step toward me, his eyes searching my face, as if trying to reconcile memory with reality. "Mrs. Holloway," he said, his voice softer now. It's really you." The volunteers around us paused in their work, glancing between us. I felt my pulse quicken. "I'm sorry," I said gently. "Have we met?" He shook his head immediately. "Oh no, you wouldn't remember me. Not like this. I was just a boy then." "A boy." I studied his face more carefully. The lines at the corners of his eyes, the set of his jaw, the way he held himself confident but not arrogant. There was something familiar there, something buried under time and adulthood. "I taught many children," I said. "You'll have to forgive me if Daniel," he said quickly. Daniel Brooks. The name settled somewhere in my memory, like a stone dropped into still water. Daniel Brooks. I closed my eyes for a brief second, searching. A classroom, small desks, a boy in the third row by the window. Quiet, always watching, struggling with reading at first, then catching up faster than anyone expected. When I opened my eyes again, I saw him. Not the man in front of me. The boy. "Danny," I whispered. His face lit up in a way that erased 20, maybe 30 years in an instant. "Yes," he said, almost laughing now. "Yes, ma'am, that's me." I felt my hand rise to my chest. "Danny Brooks," I repeated. "You used to stay after class every Tuesday. And Thursday?" he added quickly. "You said I needed extra practice." I smiled despite myself. "You didn't need practice. You needed patience." He laughed, a real laugh this time. "You were the only one who had any." The kitchen seemed to grow quieter, as if even the noise understood that something important was happening. "What are you doing here?" he asked suddenly, his expression shifting from warmth to confusion. "I mean, of course you're here, but why are you—" He glanced around. At the napkins, at the trays, at the apron someone had placed near my elbow, at the cookie tin, and then back at me. I saw it happen. The realization. "You're volunteering?" he asked carefully. "Just helping out for a bit," I said. "For the ceremony, yes. My granddaughter is being honored today." His eyebrows lifted. "Emily Holloway." "Yes." A slow, incredulous smile spread across his face. "Emily is your granddaughter. She is." He shook his head slightly, as if trying to take it all in. That's incredible." He paused. Then his expression changed again. This time it wasn't confusion. It was something sharper. "Mrs. Holloway," he said quietly, "why are you in the kitchen?" The question was simple, but it landed heavier than anything Lauren had said. I hesitated. "Lauren thought it would be best if I waited here for a bit," I replied. "Lauren, my daughter-in-law." He repeated the name under his breath, as if committing it to memory. "And she asked you to stay in the kitchen." "It's busy out there," I said gently. "They're organizing seating." Daniel's jaw tightened. I saw it clearly now. The boy I had once taught to speak up when something was wrong had grown into a man who did not ignore what he saw. "Mrs. Holloway," he said, his voice steady but firm, "you should not be in here." I gave a small smile. "I'm fine, Daniel, truly." "No," he said, shaking his head. "You're not." "Mrs. Holloway," he said, his voice steady but firm, "you should not be in here." I gave a small smile. "I'm fine, Daniel, truly." "No," he said, shaking his head. "You're not." The room felt different now. The volunteers were no longer pretending not to listen. Something had shifted, and everyone could feel it. "You taught at Lincoln for how many years?" he asked. 38. "And you're standing in the kitchen while your granddaughter is being honored in the auditorium." I opened my mouth, but no words came. Because when he said it like that, plainly, without softness or excuse, it sounded exactly as it was. "Wrong." "I don't mind helping," I said finally. "I know you don't," he replied gently. "That's not the point." He took a step closer. "You were my first-grade teacher." I nodded. "You stayed after school with me for months because I couldn't read." "You learned," I said softly. "Because you refused to let me give up." His voice had changed now. It carried something deeper. "You bought me my first book," he continued. "Do you remember that?" I searched my memory. A thin paperback, bright cover, a boy holding a kite. "I might," I said. "You wrote my name inside the front cover," he said. "And you told me that one day I would read books thicker than that one and understand every word." I felt my throat tighten. "You were right." He looked at me, his eyes bright. "Everything I am today started in your classroom." The kitchen had gone completely still. And now he added quietly, "I walk into my own school and find you standing back here like you don't belong." His words hung in the air. "Your school." I blinked. "Your school," I repeated. He straightened slightly. "I'm the principal here, Mrs. Holloway." For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. Daniel Brooks, little Danny, the boy who struggled with reading, the boy who stayed after class, the boy who once whispered words under his breath until they made sense, now standing in front of me as the principal of Lincoln Elementary. "Oh," I said, softly. "That is right." He nodded. And I've been trying to find you for years. Find me? Yes. He looked almost frustrated. We've honored dozens of educators in this district. Teachers who stayed 5 years, 10 years, people who made a difference in small ways. He paused. And all this time, the one person who changed the most lives disappeared. I shook my head. I didn't disappear. I just retired. You disappeared from the story, he said. From the recognition. From everything you deserved. I looked down at my hands. I never needed recognition. I know, he said immediately. That's exactly why you deserve it. He took a breath as if making a decision. Mrs. Holloway. James, you need to come with me. I hesitated. The ceremony is about to start, I said. I don't want to interrupt. You won't be interrupting, he said firmly. His eyes met mine. You'll be exactly where you belong. Something in his voice made my heart shift again. Not the quiet shift from before. This one was stronger, more certain. Like a door opening that I had not even realized was still closed. I glanced once more at the cookie tin, at the neatly folded napkins, at the place where I had been standing, trying to make myself useful enough to justify being unseen. Then I looked back at Daniel, at the boy I had once taught, at the man he had become. And for the first time that day, I felt something rise inside me that I had not allowed myself to feel in a very long time. Not shame, not doubt, but something closer to dignity. I'll come, I said, and as I stepped away from the counter, leaving the kitchen behind me, I had no idea that the next few minutes were about to change not only how others saw me, but how I saw myself. As Daniel led me out of the kitchen, the sounds of the school shifted again. The clatter of trays faded behind us, replaced by the growing murmur of the crowd in the auditorium. Each step down the hallway felt heavier than the last, not because of fear, but because of what I was leaving behind. The kitchen, the quiet place where I had been tucked away, the place where I had been made small. We walked side by side, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Daniel slowed his pace slightly. Are you all right? He asked. I nodded, though I wasn't entirely sure what that meant anymore. I am, I said, just surprised. He gave a small, understanding smile. I imagine so. We passed the same classrooms as before, but this time, I didn't feel like I was being guided away from something. I felt like I was being brought back toward the sound of voices, back toward the stage, back toward the place where I had once stood every single day of my life. As we approached the main hallway, I could see the auditorium doors ahead, wide open now. The room inside was filling quickly. Parents, teachers, students, all taking their seats, settling in, waiting for the ceremony to begin. Daniel stopped just before we reached the entrance. Mrs. Holloway, he said gently. I turned to him. I need you to trust me for a moment. There was something in his voice steady, certain, that reminded me of the boy who used to look at me for reassurance before reading a sentence out loud. I do, I said. He nodded once, then pushed open the door fully. The sound hit me all at once. Voices, laughter, programs rustling. The low hum of anticipation that fills a room just before something important begins. And then, silence. Not complete silence, but that subtle shift when a crowd notices something out of place, or someone. Heads turned, eyes followed. I felt it like a wave moving through the room. Daniel stepped slightly ahead of me, his presence commanding without being loud. People recognized him instantly. Conversations quieted. A few teachers straightened in their seats. "Principal Brooks," someone called softly. He raised a hand in acknowledgement but did not stop walking. And I followed. Every step felt exposed. Not because I had done anything wrong, but because, for so long, I had been taught to stay unnoticed. Now, there was no place to hide. I scanned the room instinctively. Rows of chairs filled with parents dressed in their best. Teachers standing along the walls. Students gathered near the stage. And then I saw them. Michael, Lauren. They were sitting exactly where I had seen them from the kitchen window near the front in seats that were clearly reserved. Lauren's smile froze the moment she saw me. Her eyes widened just slightly the way they do when something carefully planned begins to unravel. Michael looked confused, then alarmed, then something else, something I had not seen in him for a long time. Awareness. Daniel did not slow down. He led me straight down the center aisle. Whispers followed us. "Who is that? Is that? Wait, I think I've seen her before." I kept my eyes forward, my hands steady at my sides. We reached the front row. Daniel turned slightly toward me. "Please," he said softly, gesturing to an empty seat in the very front. The seat. The one beside my family. The one that had been left empty. I hesitated. For a brief moment, all the years of being told to step back, to stay quiet, to let others take the space they pressed against me, like invisible hands. But then I thought of Emily, of her small voice asking, "Promise," and I sat down. Right there, where I belonged. Lauren leaned slightly toward Michael, whispering something urgently. I could feel her eyes on me, sharp and unsettled. Michael looked at me, really looked. For the first time that day, he didn't glance away. "Mom," he said under his breath. I met his gaze. "I'm here," I replied quietly. Daniel stepped away from us and moved toward the stage. The room began to settle again, though the energy had changed. There was a ripple of curiosity now, a sense that something unexpected was unfolding. A teacher approached Daniel near the podium. "Are we ready?" she asked. He nodded. "Almost." He glanced back at me once more, just briefly, and I saw that same determination in his eyes. Then he turned to the microphone. "Good afternoon, everyone." The room quieted immediately. "Thank you all for being here today for our Lincoln Legacy celebration." Polite applause followed. I folded my hands in my lap, trying to steady the rhythm of my breathing. This is one of my favorite days of the year. Thank you all for being here today for our Lincoln Legacy celebration. Polite applause followed. I folded my hands in my lap, trying to steady the rhythm of my breathing. This is one of my favorite days of the year, Daniel continued, because it's a day when we recognize not only academic achievement, but character perseverance, and the kind of quiet strength that shapes lives in ways we don't always see right away. His voice carried easily through the room, confident and warm. "We have many wonderful students to honor today," he said, "and we will get to each of them shortly." He paused. "But before we begin," there it was, a shift, small but unmistakable. "I would like to take a moment," he continued, "to recognize someone who in many ways represents the very foundation of everything we celebrate here today." A murmur moved through the audience. I felt my heart begin to pound. Daniel's gaze moved slowly across the room. "Someone who has changed more lives than we can count." My fingers tightened slightly in my lap. Someone whose impact reaches far beyond test scores or awards. Lauren shifted beside Michael. I could feel the tension in her body. And someone, Daniel said, his voice deepening just slightly, who has been far too humble and perhaps far too overlooked for far too long. The room was completely still now. Every eye was on him, and I realized with a sudden startling clarity, he wasn't just speaking to the room, he was speaking to me. My breath caught. Memories began to surface without warning. A classroom filled with children's voices, a small hand slipping into mine during a fire drill, a boy struggling to sound out words, a girl crying because she thought she wasn't smart enough. All the years, all the moments, all the quiet work that no one had ever stood up and announced. I had never needed that. I had never asked for it. But sitting there in the front row with the entire room holding its breath, I felt something I had not expected. Not pride, something deeper. Recognition, not from others, but from within myself. Daniel took a step forward. I ask that you bear with me for just a moment, he said, because sometimes before we can move forward, we need to acknowledge the shoulders we are standing on. He looked directly toward the front row, toward me, and in that instant, I understood. The kitchen, the hallway, the years of silence, the smallness I had been made to feel. All of it was about to be seen, and not just seen, understood. I glanced once more at Michael. His expression had changed completely now. There was no confusion left, only realization, and something else. Regret. Lauren, for the first time since I had known her, looked uncertain. Not composed, not in control, just uncertain. And I realized then, the story they had believed about me was about to change. Not because I had demanded it, not because I had fought for it, but because someone remembered. Daniel's voice filled the room again, and so he said, "Before we honor our students," he paused and smiled, "I would like to honor a teacher." My heart stopped, just for a second. A teacher. And for the first time in years, I felt like one again. The word teacher seemed to echo inside my chest long after Daniel said it. A teacher, not a helper in the kitchen, not an inconvenience to be managed, not a distraction. A teacher. I sat very still in my seat, my hands folded tightly together as Daniel stepped fully behind the podium. The microphone picked up the soft sound of him adjusting the papers in front of him, but I could tell he wasn't going to read from them. This was not something prepared. This was something he carried. When we talk about legacy, he began, his voice steady and clear. We often think about buildings, programs, or names on plaques. He glanced briefly toward the walls where framed photographs of past achievements hung neatly in rows. But the truth is, he continued, the most powerful legacy a school can have is people. A few heads nodded in the audience. People who show up every day, he said, long before recognition is ever considered. People who give more than their job description requires. People who see children not just for who they are, but for who they can become. My throat tightened. Because I had known those people. I had worked beside them. And once upon a time, I had been one of them. There was a teacher here, Daniel said, who believed that no child should ever feel invisible in a classroom. His words wrapped around me. She believed that every child deserved patience, that learning wasn't about speed, it was about being seen, being understood, and being given the chance to try again. I could feel eyes shifting in the room now, looking, searching. She stayed after school, he continued, long after the final bell rang. She spent her own money to make sure children had what they needed. She remembered birthdays when no one else did. She listened when children didn't yet have the words to explain what they were going through. A soft murmur moved through the audience, and perhaps most importantly, he said, his voice softening. She believed in children who did not yet believe in themselves. My vision blurred, because I could see them, all of them. The boy who stuttered through every sentence until one day he didn't. The girl who hid her drawings because she thought they weren't good enough. The child who came to school hungry and pretended he wasn't. I had not saved the world, but I had stood in a small room day after day and tried to make it kinder. Daniel paused. Then he said something that made my breath catch completely. I was one of those children. A ripple of surprise moved through the room. I sat in her classroom. He continued struggling to read. Falling behind, feeling like I didn't belong in school at all. He gave a small, almost embarrassed smile. I remember the day I tried to hide my book so I wouldn't have to read out loud. My hands trembled slightly, because I remembered that too. She didn't embarrass me, he said. She didn't call me out in front of the class. She simply walked over, knelt beside my desk, and said, "Danny, we'll figure this out together." There it was. That moment, so small, so ordinary. And yet, here it was, echoing across a room full of people. That sentence changed my life, Daniel said quietly. Because for the first time, I believed that maybe I wasn't the problem. Maybe I just needed someone who wouldn't give up on me. The room had gone completely still. Even the children seemed to sense that something important was being said. And she didn't give up, he continued. Not once, not on me, not on anyone. He looked out over the audience. And I stand here today, not just as a principal, but as a man who owes his entire path to a teacher who refused to let me disappear. My heart was pounding so loudly, I was certain the people around me could hear it. I glanced sideways at Michael. His eyes were fixed on the stage now, not on his phone, not on the program, on Daniel, on the story, on me. Lauren sat very still. Her posture, once so composed, had lost its ease. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, her expression unreadable but no longer controlled. Daniel took a slow breath. For years, he said, we have celebrated achievements in this building, but somehow we missed the person who made so many of those achievements possible. He paused. And today, I intend to correct that. A ripple of anticipation moved through the room. My chest felt tight, not from fear, but from something I didn't yet have a name for. Mrs. James Holloway. And today, I intend to correct that. A ripple of anticipation moved through the room. My chest felt tight, not from fear, but from something I didn't yet have a name for. Mrs. James Holloway. Daniel said, his voice strong and clear. Would you please stand? The world seemed to stop, just for a second. I felt every eye in the room turn toward me. I felt Michael's gaze, Lauren's, strangers, teachers, students, all of it. And for a moment, the old instinct returned. Stay seated. Stay quiet. Do not draw attention. But then I thought of the kitchen, of the empty seat beside my family, of all the times I had made myself smaller so others could feel comfortable. And I stood, slowly, carefully, but fully. A sound rose in the room. At first it was just a few people, then more. Then applause, not polite, not hesitant, real, warm, growing. I looked around, my eyes wide, my heart racing. People were standing, one by one, teachers, parents, even some of the students. They were standing. For me. I pressed my hand gently against my chest, trying to steady myself. I had stood in front of classrooms filled with children. I had spoken at assemblies. I had led reading circles in school plays. But I had never felt anything like this, not because of the applause, but because of what it meant. I was being seen, not for what I wore, not for where I sat, but for what I had done, for who I had been, for the life I had lived. Daniel stepped away from the podium and came down from the stage. The applause continued as he approached me. When he reached my seat, he held out his hand. "Would you join me up front?" he asked softly. My throat tightened. "I don't know what to say," I whispered. "You don't have to say anything," he replied. "You've already said enough in a lifetime." Something inside me broke then, not in a painful way, in a releasing way, like a knot that had been tied for years had finally come undone. I placed my hand in his. And as he helped me step into the aisle, the applause grew louder, stronger, full. I walked toward the stage, not as someone hidden in a kitchen, not as someone placed out of sight, but as someone being called forward. And with each step, I felt the weight of years begin to lift. Because sometimes all it takes is one person to remember who you are, to remind the world. I don't remember climbing the steps onto the stage. Not exactly. I remember the feeling of Daniel's hand steadying mine. I remember the sound of applause still echoing behind me like a wave that refused to settle. I remember the way the lights seemed brighter than I expected, and how the room full of people only moments ago suddenly felt very quiet. But the steps themselves, they blurred together. One moment I was standing in the aisle, the next I was beside the podium. Daniel guided me gently to a chair placed slightly behind him, but still clearly visible to everyone in the room. Not hidden, not secondary, present. I sat down slowly, my hands resting in my lap, my heart still racing in a way I could not control. From that vantage point, I could see everything. The rows of parents, the teachers lining the walls, the students gathered near the stage, and right there in the front row, my family. Michael sat forward now, his elbows on his knees, his eyes fixed on me with an intensity I hadn't seen since he was a boy trying to understand something important. Lauren sat beside him, her posture still straight, but no longer effortless. Her expression had softened into something uncertain, something she didn't quite know how to hold. And Emily, my sweet Emily. She had slipped out from backstage, standing just off to the side of the curtain. Her eyes were wide, shining, her hands pressed together in front of her chest, as if she were holding on to something precious. She was looking at me the way I had always hoped someone would. Like I mattered. Daniel returned to the microphone. "Thank you," he said once the applause had finally begun to settle. "Thank you for that." He turned slightly toward me, his expression warm but composed. "I know Mrs. Holloway doesn't seek attention," he continued, "and I'm certain she didn't come here today expecting this." A few soft chuckles moved through the audience. I gave a small, almost embarrassed smile. He wasn't wrong. "I also know," he added, "that she would probably prefer that we move quickly along to the students because that's who she has always cared about most." That was true too. But sometimes, he said, his voice firming just slightly, we need to pause long enough to acknowledge the people who made those students possible. He looked out over the room again. "And so, if you'll allow me, I'd like to tell you a little more about the teacher sitting behind me." My breath caught, because telling a story about someone in front of them is a different kind of exposure. Not uncomfortable, but deeply personal. "Mrs. James Holloway taught at Lincoln Elementary for 38 years, Daniel said. Nearly 4 decades of her life spent in one classroom shaping young minds. He began to walk slowly across the stage as he spoke, not pacing, but moving with intention. In those years, she taught hundreds, if not thousands, of children. Many of them went on to become doctors, teachers, business owners, parents, and leaders in this very community. He paused. But what makes her extraordinary is not just the number of students she taught. He turned, slightly his gaze meeting mine for a brief moment. It's the way she taught them. A hush fell over the room again. She didn't believe in giving up on a child, he said. Not ever. No matter how far behind they were, no matter how difficult their circumstances, no matter how long it took. He smiled faintly. I know this because I was one of those children. There was a ripple of recognition, now people connecting the earlier story to the present moment. I remember sitting in her classroom convinced I would never catch up. He continued, convinced I wasn't smart enough, convinced that school simply wasn't for me. His voice softened, and she refused to accept that. I felt my eyes fill again. She stayed after school with me, he said, day after day, week after week. Not because she was required to, but because she believed I was worth the time. He glanced toward the audience, and she did that for countless others. A teacher near the back raised her hand slightly, as if in silent agreement. A parent nodded. A student leaned closer to hear. Now, Daniel continued. Most of those moments were never recorded. They weren't written in reports. They weren't announced at assemblies. They happened quietly in small classrooms with small victories that no one else saw. He stopped walking. And that's the thing about real impact, he said. It often happens where no one is looking. The words settled over the room like something sacred. And yet, he added, the results of that impact are everywhere. He gestured gently toward the audience. They're sitting in these chairs. A man in the third row straightened. A woman near the aisle row straightened. A woman near the aisle covered her mouth. They're raising families, Daniel said. They're building careers. They're contributing to this community because someone at the very beginning told them they could, covered her mouth. They're raising families, Daniel said. They're building careers. They're contributing to this community because someone at the very beginning told them they could. He looked at me again, and that someone was her. The room was silent now, not empty, not uncomfortable, full of understanding, full of recognition, full of something that didn't need to be spoken out loud. I felt a tear slip down my cheek. I didn't wipe it away. For once, I didn't feel the need to hide it. Daniel took a breath. But there's one more thing, he said. And something in his tone shifted again. Subtle, but important. Years ago, he continued, there was an incident that many people in this community still remember, even if they don't always remember the name behind it. My heart skipped because I knew what he was about to say, or at least I thought I did. It was a winter morning, he said. A school bus, a mechanical failure, and a situation that could have ended very differently. A murmur moved through the audience. Some people nodded, already remembering. Others leaned forward, curious. And in that moment, Daniel said, one teacher made a decision. My hands tightened in my lap. She didn't wait for instructions. He continued, she didn't think about recognition. She didn't consider her own safety. He paused. She acted. The room felt smaller somehow, closer. As a result, he said every single child on that bus made it home safely. A collective breath seemed to move through the audience. But what most people don't know, Daniel added, is that she never told the story herself. He turned fully toward me now. She never sought credit, never gave interviews, never allowed her name to be attached to what happened. I shook my head slightly instinctively. It hadn't felt like something to talk about. It had just felt like the right thing to do. And so Daniel said, turning back to the audience, for years, that story existed without a name. He let the silence linger. Today, he said finally, I think it's time that changes. My heart pounded. Because this was not something I had expected. This was not something I had prepared for. And yet, here it was, being brought into the light. For those of you who have heard that story, he said, and for those of you hearing it for the first time, he smiled gently. Please know this. He paused, and then said the words that seemed to echo far beyond the walls of that auditorium. The teacher who made that decision is sitting right here. The room erupted, not in polite applause, not in quiet acknowledgement, but in something powerful, something immediate, something real. People stood again, faster this time, louder, stronger. And as the sound filled the room, I sat there, no longer hidden, no longer overlooked, no longer placed in the background, but seen, truly seen. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel like I had to earn that place. I simply belonged in it. The applause did not fade quickly. It rose, filled the room, echoed off the walls, and came back stronger, as if the building itself remembered something long forgotten and was trying to give it back all at once. I sat there on that stage, my hands trembling slightly in my lap, trying to understand what was happening. Not just around me, but inside me. For years, I had told myself that recognition didn't matter, that the work was enough, that quiet impact was still impact, and all of that was true. But I had not realized how deeply I had been carrying the absence of being seen. Until now. Daniel waited patiently, allowing the applause to settle on its own terms. He did not rush it. He did not interrupt it. He respected it. And when the room finally began to quiet, he stepped forward again. There's something else I want to do, he said. His tone had shifted slightly again. Not as formal, not as rehearsed. More personal, more immediate. Because while I can stand here and tell you about Mrs. Holloway, he continued, I know there are others in this room who can tell you even more. A murmur of curiosity spread through the audience. Daniel looked out over the crowd. If you are here today, he said, and you are ever a student of Mrs. Holloway, I would ask you to stand. For a second, nothing happened. Then a chair scraped. A man in the third row stood slowly. He looked to be in his 40s, dressed in a neat suit, his expression already emotional. Then another person stood, a woman near the aisle. Then another, and another. Within seconds, it was no longer one or two. It was dozens. People rising from their seats across the room. Different ages, different lives, different paths. All connected by one small classroom. My classroom. I covered my mouth with my hand, unable to stop the tears now. Because I recognized some of them. Not immediately, not perfectly, but in flashes. A pair of eyes, a smile, a way of standing. Children I had once known, now grown. One of them stepped slightly into the aisle. Mrs. Holloway. Not immediately, not perfectly, but in flashes. A pair of eyes, a smile, a way of standing. Children I had once known, now grown. One of them stepped slightly into the aisle. Mrs. Holloway, he said, his voice shaking. I looked at him, really looked, and then I saw it. Ethan, I whispered. Dr. Ethan Carter. He had been a quiet boy, thoughtful, always asking questions that went just a little deeper than the lesson required. Now he stood before me in a tailored suit, a stethoscope no longer around his neck, but the presence of someone who had saved lives unmistakable in the way he carried himself. He nodded, his eyes bright. Yes, ma'am. A soft ripple moved through the room. Would you mind? Daniel said gently, handing him the microphone. Ethan hesitated only for a moment before taking it. He turned toward me first. I don't know if you remember this, he said, his voice steadying as he spoke. But when I was in your class, my father lost his job. I felt my breath catch. I remembered, not the exact details, but the feeling. The way he had come to school quieter than usual. The way his clothes had been worn just a little thinner. The way he stopped bringing lunch. You noticed, he continued. You didn't say anything in front of the class. You didn't make me feel different. He swallowed. But every day there was a small brown bag on your desk, and somehow it always ended up in my hands. The room was silent again. And you told me, he said, his voice breaking slightly, that it was just extra food you had brought by mistake. A soft, collective breath moved through the audience. But it wasn't a mistake, he added. It was kindness. He looked out over the room. I'm a doctor now, he said. I work in cardiology. I save lives. He paused. But the first time someone saved mine was in first grade. My chest tightened, because I had never thought of it that way. Not once. Ethan turned back toward me. You didn't just teach me how to read, he said. You taught me that I mattered. He handed the microphone back to Daniel, his eyes still on mine. Thank you, he whispered. I could not speak. I could barely breathe. Daniel accepted the microphone, his expression deeply moved. Thank you, Dr. Carter, he said softly, but he wasn't finished. Is there anyone else? He asked. A woman stood up near the back. She stepped forward slightly, raising her hand. Daniel nodded, offering her the microphone. I'm Patricia Evans, she said. I taught here for 20 years. I recognized her immediately. Patricia, I whispered. She smiled through her tears. You were my mentor, she said. My first year teaching, I thought I was going to quit. I couldn't manage the classroom. I couldn't keep up with the work. I felt like I was failing every single day. She shook her head slightly. And you sat with me after school just like you did with your students. A small laugh moved through the audience. You told me something I've never forgotten, she continued. You said, the children don't need perfection. They need consistency. I felt a tear slip down again. And because of you, she said, I stayed. And I taught hundreds of children of my own. She placed her hand over her heart. That's your legacy too. The microphone passed again. Another voice, another story, another life touched. A man who became a coach. A woman who became a teacher. A parent who said their child found confidence because of something I had said. Each story was different, but the thread was the same. Small moments, quiet choices, things I had never thought would be remembered. And yet here they were, standing, speaking, remembering. I looked out over the room again, my vision blurred with tears. And then I saw her. Emily. She was no longer standing by the curtain. She had stepped forward closer to the stage, her eyes fixed on me in a way that made my heart ache and swell at the same time. Because now she knew. Not the version of me that Lauren had tried to manage, not the version of me that sat quietly and avoided attention, but the truth, the whole truth. And in her eyes, I saw something shift. Not just love, not just admiration. Pride. Real, unfiltered pride. Daniel gently took the microphone back once more. "I think it's safe to say," he said, "that Mrs. Holloway's impact speaks for itself." Soft laughter, warm and emotional, moved through the room. "But there's one more thing," he added, and again, that subtle shift in his voice. Something was still coming. He turned toward me. "Mrs. Holloway," he said, "we've spent years trying to find a way to properly honor the legacy you've left behind at Lincoln." I blinked. "Trying to find a way, and today," he continued, "I'm proud to say we finally have." My heart began to race again, because I did not know what that meant. Not yet, but I could feel it, something significant, something lasting, something that would not fade when the applause ended. And as I sat there on that stage, surrounded by the voices of the past and the presence of the present, I realized something I had not allowed myself to believe before. A life lived quietly does not mean a life lived small. And sometimes the impact you think no one noticed is the very thing that changes everything. The applause had not fully settled when I noticed Lauren. It wasn't obvious at first. If you didn't know her, you might have missed it entirely. She still sat upright, still composed, still dressed perfectly, every detail in place, as if nothing in the room had shifted. But I knew her, and I could see it. Her hands were no longer relaxed. They were clasped tightly together in her lap, fingers pressing into one another, as if she were holding something in place. Control. That was what Lauren valued most. Control over how things looked. Control over what people saw. Control over the story. And right now, that control was slipping. Daniel stepped forward again, his voice steady as ever. "Mrs. Holloway's story is one of quiet impact," he said, "but there is another part of this story that deserves to be acknowledged as well." The room stilled again. I felt my heartbeat pick up, because there was something in his tone, something deliberate. He wasn't just honoring me. He was correcting something, and I began to understand this wasn't only about recognition. It was about truth. "When I came into the kitchen earlier today," Daniel continued, "I found Mrs. Holloway standing behind a counter helping prepare refreshments." A ripple moved through the audience. Confusion. Surprise. A few heads turned instinctively toward the back of the room as if trying to locate the space he was describing. I felt the air change. Sharp now, focused, and while there is absolutely nothing wrong with helping, he said carefully, "I want to be very clear about something." He paused. Every word now carried weight. She was not there by choice. The silence that followed was different from before, heavier, more uncomfortable, more honest. I lowered my eyes briefly, not in shame, but in recognition of the moment. Because this was the part that people often avoided. The part where truth doesn't just uplift, it exposes. "I don't know all the details," Daniel continued, "and I won't pretend to speak for anyone else's intentions." That was kindness. Restraint. "But I do know this," he added, his voice firm. "A woman who has given nearly 4 decades of her life to this school should never be made to feel like she belongs anywhere but the front of the room." A murmur spread through the audience. This time, it wasn't admiration. It was something else. Disapproval, awareness, recognition of something wrong. I could feel it shift around us like a tide turning. I didn't need to look at Lauren. I knew. Still, I did. Just for a moment. Her face had lost its color. Not dramatically, but enough. Enough that the mask she wore so carefully no longer fit the same way. Her eyes flicked toward me, then away. Michael beside her sat completely still. His jaw was tight, his shoulders tense, and then slowly he turned his head toward Lauren. Not with anger, not yet, but with something deeper. Realization. Daniel's voice softened again. "This isn't about blame," he said. "It's about understanding what we choose to value and what we overlook." He looked out at the audience. In a world that often celebrates appearances, titles, and status, it becomes very easy to miss the people who quietly hold everything together. I felt those words settle somewhere deep inside me, because I had lived them for years. And today he continued. "I think we've all been reminded of something important." He paused. "That dignity is not something that should be granted based on how someone looks, what they wear, or where they sit." A few people nodded. Some looked down. "Dignity," he said, "is something that already exists." He's something that already exists. He glanced toward me, and sometimes it just needs to be recognized. The room was quiet again, but not empty. Full of reflection, full of shifting perspectives, full of people rethinking what they had assumed just moments before. I felt a strange calm settle over me, not because what had happened earlier no longer mattered, but because it had been seen, not ignored, not brushed aside, seen. And there is a kind of peace that comes with that. Daniel stepped slightly back from the microphone. "I'd like to invite Mrs. Holloway to say a few words if she feels comfortable," he said. My breath caught. Say something in front of all these people. For years, I had been the one speaking, in classrooms, in small gatherings, in quiet conversations. But this was different. This was not about teaching. This was about being heard. Daniel turned toward me, his expression gentle. "Only if you'd like," he added softly. I hesitated. For a moment, the old instinct returned. Stay quiet. Let the moment pass. But then I looked out at the audience, at the faces of former students, at the teachers who had stood, at Emily watching me with that same unwavering belief, at Michael still looking at me waiting, and even at Lauren. Not with anger, not with resentment, but with something quieter. Clarity. I stood slowly. The room grew still again. Daniel stepped aside, giving me space at the microphone. I walked toward it, carefully aware of every step, every breath. When I reached it, I placed my hands lightly on either side, steadying myself. For a moment, I didn't speak. I just looked. At all of them. At this room. At this moment I had never expected. Then softly, I said, "I didn't come here today to be recognized." My voice was quiet, but it carried. I came here to watch my granddaughter. A small ripple of warmth moved through the room, and I was perfectly content sitting wherever I was asked to sit. That was true. Painfully true, because I had grown used to it. But today, I continued. I was reminded of something I had almost forgotten. I paused, letting the words settle. That where you are asked to sit does not define your worth. Silence. Deep. Attentive. I spent many years teaching children that they mattered. I said, that their voices mattered, that their presence mattered. My hands steadied, and somewhere along the way, I forgot to tell myself the same thing. A breath moved through the audience, soft, shared. "But I remember now," I said, and for the first time in years, I truly meant it. I glanced toward Emily, and I hope I added gently that the next generation remembers it sooner than I did. My eyes moved across the room one last time. To everyone who stood today, thank you. My voice caught slightly. You reminded me that the smallest moments are never truly small. I stepped back, and for a heartbeat there was silence. Then the applause came again, not louder, but deeper, more grounded, more real. And as I stood there, no longer hidden, no longer overlooked, I realized something that changed everything. Respect is not something you beg for. It is something you remember you deserve. The applause lingered long after I stepped back from the microphone. It wasn't the kind of applause that fades quickly into polite silence. It stayed, warm, steady, real. And as I returned to my seat on the stage, I felt something inside me settle, not the kind of quiet that comes from being ignored, but the kind that comes from finally being at peace with being seen. Daniel waited for the room to settle once more before stepping forward again. "Thank you, Mrs. Holloway," he said softly. Then he turned back to the audience. And now he continued, "Before we move on to our student awards, there is one more voice that I believe we need to hear today." I felt my breath catch again. Another voice. Daniel glanced toward the side of the stage. "Emily Holloway," he called gently. "Would you come join us?" My heart skipped. "Emily." I turned immediately. She stood frozen for just a second near the curtain, her small hands still clasped together, her eyes wide, as if she wasn't sure she had heard correctly. Then someone backstage, another teacher, gave her a soft nudge, and she stepped forward, slowly at first, then with more certainty. She walked toward the stage, her small shoes making the softest sound against the floor, her blue dress catching the light as she moved. When she reached the steps, Daniel bent slightly, offering his hand. She took it and climbed up. My eyes never left her, not for a second, because this was her moment, and I suddenly understood that everything that had happened before the kitchen, the humiliation, the recognition, the stories, the truth being spoken, it had all led here. Emily stepped onto the stage and looked out at the audience. For a brief moment, I saw it. Fear. That small human hesitation before speaking in front of a crowd. But then she looked at me, and something changed. Her shoulders straightened, her chin lifted just slightly, and the fear softened. Daniel handed her the microphone. "I was told," he said gently, "that you had prepared a speech for today." Emily nodded. "Yes, sir. But I also heard," he added, "that you might have something else you'd like to say." She hesitated. Just for a second. Then she looked out at the audience again. "My mom helped me write a speech," she said. There was no accusation in her voice, just honesty. "It was about leadership and responsibility," she continued. "And how students can make a difference." She paused, and I practiced it a lot. A few soft smiles appeared in the audience, but today she said, her voice growing steadier, "I think I want to say something different." The room became very still. I felt my heart tighten, because I didn't know what she was going to say. Not really. But I knew it would be true. And truth has a way of changing everything. Emily took a small breath. "My grandma," she said, "is the reason I love school." The words landed softly, but they carried. "She reads with me," Emily continued. "Even when I don't want to read." A few quiet laughs. "She tells me stories about her students," she added, "and she always says that every kid is important." My throat tightened again. "She never makes me feel dumb," Emily said, "even when I make mistakes." She glanced at me again, and I could see it. That same trust. That same belief. the same look I had seen in so many children over the years. She says mistakes are how you learn, Emily continued, and that being kind is more important than being right. The room was completely silent now, listening, really listening. I wrote my first essay for this award about her, Emily said. A ripple moved through the audience. I felt something shift beside me, Daniel glancing toward her, then toward the crowd. But my mom told me to change it, Emily added. The words were simple, but they landed like something much heavier. I didn't look at Lauren. I didn't need to. She said it wasn't impressive enough. Emily continued, her voice soft, but clear. The room felt different now. Not uncomfortable, but aware. Deeply aware. So I changed it, Emily said. Because I didn't want to make anyone upset. She paused. Then, but I think I was wrong. A breath moved through the audience. Because today, she said, her voice growing stronger, I learned that the most important stories aren't the ones that sound impressive. She looked at me again. They're the ones that are true. My vision blurred completely now. I could barely see her through the tears. My grandma didn't ask to be recognized, Emily said. She didn't tell people what she did. She swallowed. But that doesn't mean it didn't matter. A few people nodded. Some wiped their eyes. She matters, Emily said firmly. The words rang through the room. Not loud, but certain. She matters to her students, she continued. She matters to this school. And then, she matters, Emily said firmly. The words rang through the room. Not loud, but certain. She matters to her students, she continued. She matters to this school. And then, she matters to this school. And then, she matters to me. My hand pressed against my chest again. Because that was everything. More than applause, more than recognition, more than anything Daniel had said. That, right there. I think Emily added, her voice softening again, that sometimes we forget that people who don't look important are actually the most important. A silence followed, not empty, full, heavy with understanding. And I don't want to forget that anymore. She finished. She lowered the microphone slightly, then looked at Daniel, unsure if she was done. He smiled gently. I think that was perfect, he said. The applause came again, but this time it felt different, not just for me, for her, for the truth she had spoken. I stood before I even realized I was moving, and when she turned toward me, I opened my arms. She ran into them, right there on that stage, in front of everyone, and I held her tightly, feeling her small arms wrap around me, her face pressed against my shoulder. I'm so proud of you, I whispered. She pulled back just enough to look at me. I'm proud of you too, Grandma James, she said. And in that moment, everything that had been taken from me in silence was given back in truth. After Emily stepped down from the stage, the room did not return to what it had been before. It couldn't. Something had shifted too deeply. Even as Daniel gently guided the ceremony back toward its original purpose, announcing student awards, calling names, inviting applause, there was a different kind of attention in the room now. People weren't just listening. They were reflecting, and I could feel it in the way the atmosphere had softened, in the way conversations were quieter, in the way eyes occasionally drifted toward me, not with curiosity, but with respect. I sat beside Daniel for the remainder of the program, my hands resting calmly in my lap, now my breathing steady again. For the first time that day, I felt completely at ease, not because everything was perfect, but because everything was honest, And honesty has a way of bringing peace even when it arrives late. When Emily's name was finally called, the applause rose again, bright, joyful, proud. I stood with everyone else this time, not quietly from the shadows, but fully present. She walked across the stage, accepting her award with both hands, her smile wide and unguarded. She glanced toward me for just a moment, and I nodded, my heart full in a way I could barely contain. That was why I had come, and somehow, despite everything, it had become even more than that. When the ceremony ended, the room filled with movement. Chairs scraped, voices returned. Chairs scraped, voices returned. People gathered in small groups, congratulating students, embracing one another, exchanging stories. But I stayed where I was for a moment longer, sitting, breathing, letting the day settle inside me. Then people gathered in small groups, congratulating students, embracing one another, exchanging stories. But I stayed where I was for a moment longer, sitting, breathing, letting the day settle inside me. Then Mom. I turned. Michael stood a few steps away, alone. Lauren was not beside him. That in itself said something. He looked different. Not in appearance, but in presence. Less guarded, less distracted, more present. "Hi," I said softly. He stepped closer, his hands slipping into his pockets, then out again, unsure of where to place them. He started, then stopped. For a moment, the silence stretched between us. Not uncomfortable, but heavy. Full of everything that had not been said for a long time. "I didn't know," he said finally. His voice was low, honest. "I didn't know any of that." I studied his face. "You didn't ask," I replied gently. The words were not sharp, just true. He flinched slightly, then nodded. "You're right," he said. "I didn't." He looked down at the floor for a moment, then back at me. "I should have." I said nothing, because sometimes silence is the only space a person needs to face themselves. I thought, he continued slowly. "I thought I knew who you were." A small, sad smile touched my lips. "You did," I said. "Just not all of it." He let out a breath. "I remember you helping me with my homework," he said. "I remember you working late, always busy, always tired." His voice softened. "I remember you doing everything for me." My chest tightened slightly, but somewhere along the way he added, "I stopped seeing you as more than just my mom." I nodded. "That happens," I said. "It shouldn't," he replied quickly. "No," I agreed, "but it does." He looked at me then. Really looked. "I let things happen today that never should have happened," he said. There it was. Not an excuse, not a deflection. Ownership. I saw Laure, not a deflection. Ownership. "I saw Laure and take you to the kitchen," he continued. "And I told myself it was just temporary, that it wasn't a big deal." He shook his head slightly. "But it was." I held his gaze. "Yes," I said. "It was." He swallowed. "I'm sorry, Mom, and take you to the kitchen," he continued. And I told myself it was just temporary, that it wasn't a big deal. He shook his head slightly. "But it was." I held his gaze. "Yes," I said. "It was." He swallowed. "I'm sorry, Mom." The words hung there between us. Simple, but not small. I took a breath. "I believe you," I said. Relief flickered across his face, but it didn't erase the weight entirely. Because apology is only the beginning. "I should have spoken up," he added. "A long time ago." Yes, I said again. He nodded. I see that now. There was a quiet pause. Then, can we fix this? He asked. The question was not rushed, not desperate, just honest. I considered it, not just the moment, but the years behind it, the silence, the small dismissals, the way I had been slowly moved to the edges of my own family. I don't need things to be perfect, I said finally. His shoulders eased slightly. But I do need them to be different, I added. He nodded immediately. They will be, he said. I tilted my head slightly. They can be, I corrected gently, if you choose that every day. He let out a small breath. I will. I studied him for a moment longer. Then I reached out and placed my hand over his. A small gesture, but one that carried years of love behind it. I raised you to be a good man, I said softly. His eyes filled. I just need you to remember that. I will, he whispered. We stood there for a moment longer, neither of us moving. Then Mrs. Holloway. I turned. Daniel approached, smiling warmly. There are a few people who would love to speak with you, he said. Former students, parents, a couple of board members. I blinked. Board members? He chuckled lightly. Yes, it seems your story made quite an impression. I smiled faintly. I suppose it did. Michael stepped back slightly. I'll let you go, he said. I nodded. Thank you for coming to me, I replied. He gave a small, grateful nod, then walked away. Not toward Lauren, but toward the hallway. Alone. I watched him go for a moment, then turned back to Daniel. Are you ready? He asked gently. I looked out at the room again, at the people waiting, at the conversations beginning, at Emily laughing with another student nearby. And I realized something. For years, I had lived quietly, not unnoticed, but unacknowledged. And now the world was opening a door I had never asked for, but perhaps was meant to walk through. Yes, I said. I stood and stepped forward, not as someone who had been placed in the background, but as someone finally stepping into the space she had always earned. The crowd slowly began to thin. Clusters of parents gathered near the stage congratulating their children. Teachers exchanged quiet words, some still glancing toward me with soft smiles, as if they were carrying a new understanding they hadn't expected to find that afternoon. I spoke with many of them, former students who shared small memories I had long forgotten. A woman who told me I had once helped her overcome her fear of speaking. A man who said I had been the first person to tell him he was good at math. A young teacher who simply said, I hope I can be like you one day. Each conversation added something gentle to my heart. Not pride, something warmer, something that felt like confirmation that the life I had lived had reached further than I had ever realized. Eventually, the crowd grew smaller, quieter. And then, James, I turned. Lauren stood a few steps away. For the first time since I had known her, she didn't approach with confidence. She approached with hesitation. Her posture was still straight, but there was something missing now, the ease, the control, the carefully constructed certainty. In its place, uncertainty. And something else. Humility. I was hoping we could talk, she said. Her voice was softer than I had ever heard it. I studied her for a moment, then nodded. Of course, we stepped slightly away from the remaining crowd, finding a quiet corner near the side of the auditorium. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Lauren looked down at her hands, then back at me. I don't think I've ever been more embarrassed in my life, she said. The honesty of it surprised me, not because she was embarrassed, but because she admitted it. I'm not proud of that, she added quickly. I know this isn't about how I feel. She took a breath. It's about what I did. I said nothing. I let her speak, because this moment, this was hers. I thought I understood what mattered, she continued. Appearances, reputation, the way people see us. A small, bitter smile touched her lips. I've spent years building that. I nodded slightly. I can see that. She looked at me then. And today I realized I was building it on the wrong things. Her voice trembled slightly. Not dramatically, but enough. I asked you to sit in the kitchen, she said. Not hiding it, not softening it, naming it. Yes, I said. She swallowed. I told myself it was practical, she continued. That it was about space, about organization, about making sure everything ran smoothly. She shook her head. But that wasn't the truth. I waited. It was about control, she said quietly. About how things looked. About making sure everything fit the image I wanted. There it was. The real reason. And now it had nowhere left to hide. And you didn't fit that image, she added, her voice barely above a whisper. I held her gaze. No, I said. I didn't. A tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away immediately. I reduced you to something small, she said. Something convenient. The words were heavy, accurate, painful, and honest. I'm so sorry, James. No, I said. I didn't. A tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away immediately. I reduced you to something small, she said. Something convenient. The words were heavy, accurate, painful, and honest. I'm so sorry, James, she said. Not, I'm sorry you felt that way. Not, I didn't mean it like that. Just, I'm sorry. I took a breath. For a moment, I let myself feel it. The hurt. The years of small dismissals. The quiet ways I had been pushed aside. Not just today, but over time. And then I let it go. Not completely. Not all at once. But enough to respond with clarity instead of pain. I believe that you're sorry, I said. Relief flickered across her face, but I wasn't finished. But being sorry, I continued gently, is not the same as understanding. She nodded quickly. I know. Do you? I asked. She paused, then nodded again. I think I'm starting to. I studied her. What do you understand? I asked. She hesitated, then spoke carefully. That I judged you, she said. Based on things that don't matter. That I saw your simplicity as less. That I mistook quiet for insignificant. Her voice steadied slightly as she continued. And that I valued how things looked more than who people actually are. I nodded slowly. That's a good place to start. She let out a small breath. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, she added. I know I haven't earned that. I tilted my head slightly. Forgiveness isn't something you earn, I said. It's something that's given. She looked at me surprised. But trust? I added. That's something you build. She nodded. I understand. I stepped a little closer. Lauren, I said softly, I don't need you to be perfect. She blinked. I just need you to be aware. Her expression softened. Of what? Of how you treat people, I said, especially the ones who don't demand your attention. She swallowed. I held her gaze for a moment longer. Then I forgive you, I said. Her breath caught. Really? Yes, I replied. Not because what happened didn't matter, but because I had spent too many years teaching children about grace to withhold it now. But things will be different, I added. She nodded immediately. They will. I believed her. Not completely. Not yet. But enough. Because change doesn't happen in a moment. It happens in choices. Repeated. Consistent. Intentional. And for the first time, Lauren looked like someone who was ready to make those choices. Thank you, she said softly. I gave a small smile. You're welcome. We stood there for a moment longer, not as opponents, not as strangers, but as two people who had just stepped into a more honest version of a relationship that had never quite been right before. Then, Grandma James Emily's voice broke the moment. She came running toward us again, her energy bright and unstoppable. You were amazing, she said, throwing her arms around me once more. I laughed softly, holding her close. So were you. She pulled back, looking between me and Lauren. Are you okay? She asked, her small face serious now. Lauren knelt slightly beside her. Yes, she said gently. We're okay. Emily studied her for a moment, then nodded. Good. Children have a way of sensing truth, of accepting it when it's real. And in that moment, it was. I looked at both of them, at the future unfolding in front of me. Not perfect, but honest. And that was enough. The auditorium had nearly emptied by the time Daniel found me again. I was standing near the front, speaking with one of the teachers who had taken over room 104 years after I retired. She had been telling me how the classroom had changed. New desks, digital boards, updated curriculum. But how some things remain the same. The reading corner is still by the window, she said with a smile. We kept it there because, well, it just felt right. I smiled softly. Some things I had learned do not need to be replaced. They simply need to be replaced. They simply need to be continued. Mrs. Holloway. Daniel called gently. I turned. He was standing beside a woman and a man I did not recognize. Do you have a moment? He asked. Of course. He approached, and as he did, I noticed the small detail that set the moment apart. He was not rushing, not managing, not directing. He was honoring. This is Susan Mitchell, he said, gesturing toward the woman. Chair of the school board. Susan stepped forward, extending her hand. It's an honor to meet you, she said warmly. I shook her hand. The honor is mine, I replied. And this is Robert Miller, Daniel added. He was the physical education teacher here during your years. Robert smiled broadly. I remember you, he said. You always had the quietest class and somehow the most engaged. I laughed softly. That's because I bribed them with stickers and patience. I remember you, he said. You always had the quietest class and somehow the most engaged. I laughed softly. That's because I bribed them with stickers and patience. He chuckled. Well, whatever you did, it worked. There was a brief pause. Then Susan spoke again. We've been discussing something, she said, glancing briefly at Daniel before returning her attention to me. And we wanted to speak with you directly before making anything official. I felt a small flicker of curiosity. All right. She folded her hands gently. Over the past several years, we've created scholarships in honor of individuals who have made a lasting impact on our district, she explained. Teachers, administrators, community leaders. I nodded. That's a wonderful initiative. It is, she agreed. But until today, we didn't realize we had overlooked someone very important. I felt Daniel's gaze shift toward me. We would like to establish the James Holloway Scholarship, Susan said. The words hung in the air for a moment. Clear, simple, powerful. I blinked. I'm sorry. What? Daniel smiled softly. A scholarship in your name, he said. For students who demonstrate perseverance, kindness, and a commitment to helping others, just like you've done throughout your career. My heart tightened. Awarded annually, Susan added, to a student who may not always be the most recognized, but who shows the kind of quiet strength that changes lives. I couldn't speak. Not immediately, because this was not something I had ever imagined. Recognition fades, applause quiets, moments pass, but this would remain, long after today, long after me. I don't know what to say, I admitted softly. Daniel stepped closer. You've already said everything that matters, he replied. I looked at them both, at the sincerity in their expressions, at the weight of what they were offering, and I felt something settle deep inside me. Not pride, not disbelief, something steadier, something that felt like completion. I would be honored, I said finally. Susan smiled warmly. Then we'll begin the process immediately. Robert nodded. I think it's exactly what this district needs. They spoke for a few more minutes, details, timelines, next steps, but I only heard parts of it, because my mind had already moved somewhere else. To the children who would receive that scholarship. Children I would never meet. Children who might sit in classrooms just like mine once was. Children who might feel unseen, uncertain, unsure of their place. And somehow, in some quiet way, my name would reach them, remind them, tell them they mattered. The thought brought tears to my eyes again. Not from sadness, but from something deeper, something fuller. When Susan and Robert finally excused themselves, Daniel remained. He watched me for a moment. You all right? He asked gently. I nodded. Yes, I said. More than all right. He smiled. I thought you might be. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Then, can I show you something? He asked. I hesitated, only briefly. I'd like that. He led me out of the auditorium, down the hallway I had walked earlier that day, but this time it felt entirely different. Not like a place I had been guided through, but like a place I was returning to. We stopped in front of a familiar door, room 104. My breath caught. The number was new. The paint was fresh. But something about it still felt the same. Daniel opened the door. Go ahead, he said. I stepped inside, and for a moment, time folded. The desks were different, the walls were updated, but the light coming through those corner windows, it was exactly the same. I walked slowly into the room. My fingers brushed lightly against the edge of a desk, then another. I moved toward the reading corner, and there it was, a small rug, a shelf of books, a chair. Different from before, but still the same. This room has changed a lot, Daniel said quietly from behind me. I nodded. But it still feels like a classroom, I replied. He smiled. That's because of you. I turned to him. No, I said gently. Because of the children. He considered that, then nodded. Fair enough. I walked to the window, looked out. The playground stretched beyond it, filled with the echoes of years gone by. I used to stand here, I said softly, and watch them line up after recess. Daniel stepped beside me. I remember, he said. We stood there for a moment. Two people, connected by a place, by time, by something that had lasted far longer than either of us had expected. Thank you, he said finally. I looked at him. For what? For not giving up on me, he replied. I smiled. That was never an option. He laughed quietly. I'm glad you felt that way. I turned back to the window, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt complete. Not because everything in my life had been perfect, but because everything that mattered had been seen, honored, and carried forward. It's been 6 months since that day. 6 months since I stood on that stage, no longer hidden, no longer quietly pushed to the edges of a room I once helped build. And if you had told me then how much could change in such a short time, I don't think I would have believed you. Not because I doubted change, but because I had lived so long without expecting it. The first thing that changed was not dramatic. It was quiet, subtle, but unmistakable. Michael started calling more often. Not just quick messages or polite check-ins, but real conversations. He would ask about my day, about the garden, about the books I was reading. And sometimes he would pause in the middle of a sentence and say something like, I remember you doing that when I was a kid. It was as if he were rediscovering me, not as just his mother, but as a person with a life that existed beyond him. That meant more than he probably realized. Lauren changed too. Not overnight, not perfectly, but sincerely. The first time she came to my house after the ceremony, she stood at the doorway a little longer than usual. I brought something, she said. It wasn't expensive, it wasn't elaborate, just a simple bouquet of fresh flowers. I thought you might like these for your table. I took them, not because of the flowers, but because of what they represented. Effort, awareness, a willingness to do things differently. Thank you, I said, and I meant it. Over time, the small things began to shift. She stopped correcting me in front of others. She started asking my opinion instead of dismissing it. And once, just once, but it mattered. She said, James, you always know how to handle things like this. What do you think we should do? It was such a simple sentence. But for someone like Lauren, it was a change in direction, a step away from control, toward respect. Emily, of course, remained exactly who she had always been. Only now she was even more certain, more confident, more grounded. She started spending more time at my house again, sitting at my kitchen table with her homework spread out in front of her. Grandma James, she said one afternoon, I think I want to be a teacher. I looked at her. You'd be a wonderful one. She smiled. Do you think I could teach in your classroom one day? I felt something warm settle in my chest. I think I said softly that classroom would be lucky to have you. And perhaps that was the most beautiful part of everything. Not the recognition, not the applause, not even the scholarship, but the continuation. The passing of something meaningful from one generation to the next. A few weeks after the ceremony, Daniel invited me back to Lincoln. Not for anything formal, he said, just to visit. But when I arrived, I realized it was more than that. He had arranged for me to sit in on a first-grade reading session. Room 104. I stood in the doorway for a moment watching. A young teacher sat on the rug surrounded by children holding books, their voices soft and uncertain as they sounded out words together. One little boy struggled. I could see it immediately, the hesitation, the doubt, the quiet frustration. I stepped forward without thinking. May I asked gently. The teacher looked up, surprised, but then smiled. Of course. I knelt beside the boy. "What's your name?" I asked. "Ethan," he said. I smiled. "All right, Ethan," I said softly. "Let's figure this out together." The words felt familiar, because they were, and as he looked up at me, I saw it. That same moment, that same possibility, the same beginning. And I realized something. I had never truly stopped being a teacher. I had just stepped away from the classroom. Now I had been invited back. Not to take over, not to replace, but to continue. Daniel later asked if I would consider coming in once a week. "Just an hour or two," he said. "Reading with the kids, supporting the teachers." I didn't hesitate. I'd love that. And so now, every Thursday morning, I return to Lincoln Elementary. I sit in that classroom again. I listen to small voices find their way through big words. I tie shoelaces. I answer questions. I offer patience. And sometimes, when I stand by the window and look out at the playground, I catch a glimpse of the past. Not as something lost, but as something that never really left. As for me, I no longer worry about where I am asked to sit, because I know now my place is not determined by someone else's perception. It is defined by the life I have lived, the love I have given, the impact I have made, and that no one can take away. Not a daughter-in-law, not a room, not even time. The last time I attended a school event, I didn't sit in the kitchen. I didn't wait to be placed. I walked in, I found my seat, and I sat with my family, beside my son, beside my granddaughter. And when people turned to look, I didn't shrink. I didn't lower my eyes. I simply smiled. Because I wasn't there to be seen. I was there because I belonged, and that made all the difference. There comes a point in life when many people begin to feel invisible, not because they have nothing left to give, but because the world becomes louder, faster, and more focused on appearances than substance. Especially as we grow older, society can quietly push us to the sidelines, as if our value has an expiration date. But the truth is, value does not fade with age. It deepens. It roots itself in every sacrifice, every quiet act of kindness, every moment when you chose to show up for someone else, even when no one was watching. James Holloway's story is a reminder that dignity is not something given by others. It is something we carry within ourselves. And sometimes, all it takes is one moment, one voice, or one person remembering who we truly are to bring that dignity back into the light. It also reminds us of something equally important: the way we treat people, especially those who do not demand attention, reveals who we are far more than any title or achievement ever could. Respect should never be reserved for those who impress us. It should be extended to those who have quietly earned it. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever felt overlooked or underestimated, and then surprised by a moment that changed everything? Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your voice matters here. And if you believe in stories that remind us of dignity, family, and second chances, don't forget to like and subscribe. There are many more journeys like this waiting to be told. There are moments in life when we begin to believe that we no longer matter the way we once did. Not because we've changed, but because the world around us has. It moves faster, values different things, and sometimes forgets the quiet people who built the very foundations it now stands on. But the truth is this: your worth has never been tied to where you are asked to sit, how loudly you speak, or how others choose to see you. Your worth is built over time, through every act of kindness, every sacrifice made without applause, every moment you chose love over recognition. What this story reminds us is that dignity is not something the world gives you. It's something you must remember you already carry. And sometimes life will place you in a kitchen moment, a space where you feel overlooked, underestimated, or even invisible. But that moment does not define you. It only reveals what others have yet to understand. And here's the most powerful part. The impact you think no one noticed is often the very thing that changed someone's life. So, if you've ever felt unseen, I want you to hold on to this. Your story still matters. Your presence still matters. And the seeds you planted even years ago may still be growing in places you'll never see. If this message spoke to your heart, I'd truly love to hear from you. Have you ever experienced a moment where you felt invisible only to later realize your value was far greater than you thought? Share your story in the comments. And if you believe in stories that remind us of dignity, family, and second chances, don't forget to like and subscribe. There are many more meaningful journeys ahead, and I'd love for you to be part of them.